They say she owned the Romanov diamonds, but couldn't afford enough warmth to heat a single, lonely room. This is Barbara Hutton, the heiress who turned $1 billion legacy into a perfect, hollow silence. The emerald tiara of Catherine the Great was still heavy on her brow the night the world first hated her for having too much, while the bread lines outside stretched for miles into the cold. You see, she was the poor little rich girl, a title she didn't choose, but one she spent every dime trying to outrun. 73 custom-built trunks followed her across the Atlantic, each filled with silk and sorrow, yet none of them contained a reason to wake up the next morning. If you want to understand how an empire of gold becomes a prison of silence, stay with me. This is one of those stories. Let's get into it. Here's what I kept coming back to when I was piecing this together. How does someone with that kind of generational wealth end up with nothing and no one willing to sign their name to the real story? I'll get there, but first let me tell you where this family actually came from. It began with Frank Winfield Woolworth, a man who realized that if you sell enough 5-cent trinkets to enough people, you can eventually buy the world. He built an empire out of nickels and dimes, a retail cathedral that stood as a testament to the American dream. But the dream had a cold, hollow core. You see, in 1917, when Barbara was only 4 years old, the air in the family suite at the Plaza Hotel turned heavy with a scent no child should ever recognize. Her mother, Edna, was found dead. The official report whispered of an ear infection, but the inner circle knew better. They knew about the vials, the despair, and the husband, Franklin Hutton, who was already looking at his next investment. Before the room was even cleared. Franklin was a man of Wall Street, a broker of souls and stocks, who viewed his daughter's grief as an administrative hurdle. He took her inheritance, that staggering $50 million fortune, and managed it with the cold precision of a diamond cutter. I have seen men like him before. They don't see children, they see liabilities or assets. He moved her from one mansion to another, surrounded by French governesses and mahogany walls. But never once did he provide the one thing the money couldn't manufacture: a sense of belonging. By the time she was 12, Barbara Hutton wasn't just a girl. She was a trust fund with a pulse. There was a dinner, once at a club that no longer exists, where a former associate of her father's told me that Franklin used to check the market prices before he checked on his daughter's health. It sounds like a cruel exaggeration until you look at the way she eventually fell. That's who she was before the money reached the scale that changes men. Certain of herself, certain of her instincts, certain that the rules that applied to everyone else were suggestions at most. She was right for a long time, and then she wasn't. And the way that happened, the way the world began to sharpen its knives for the girl who had everything, is the part of this story that I can't get out of my head. The 1930 debutante ball at the Ritz was not a party. It was a declaration of war by the elite against reality. You see, while the rest of the world was standing in bread lines, Barbara Hutton was standing under $60,000 worth of lilies brought in during the dead of winter. I remember hearing a story about that night from a woman who had been a bridesmaid. She said the scent of the flowers was so thick, it felt like a funeral shroud. That is the thing about old money. It has a way of trying to mask the scent of decay with excessive beauty. The public never forgave her for that night. They saw a girl draped in silver fox fur while they couldn't afford coal. And in that moment, Barbara Hutton became the most hated woman in America. She was 21, worth $1 billion in today's currency, and completely alone behind a wall of flashbulbs and resentment. And there it was, the first cage, When the world hates you for what you have, you start to believe that the only people you can trust are the ones who have just as much. But in the world of the 1930s, socialites, having as much usually meant having a title, but no cash. That's when the parade of husbands began. First came Prince Alexis Mdivani. He was part of the Marrying Mdivanis, a group of Georgian siblings who traded their dubious royal titles for American dowries, like they were trading stocks on the NYSE. I've seen men like him before. They have a certain way of leaning against a mahogany bar, looking like they own the room, while they're secretly calculating the value of the watch on your wrist. Barbara gave him a wedding gift of $1 million. Think about that for a second. $1 million in 1933, just for the privilege of being called a princess. The thing is, power in the hands of the wrong man is a predator. Mdivani didn't just want her money. He wanted her spirit. He was the one who first told her she was too fat, the one who made her feel that her only value was her checkbook. That was the start of the anorexia that would haunt her until her last breath. She began to shrink. It's a tragic irony, isn't it? As her fortune grew through investments, she didn't even understand. The woman herself was disappearing. I heard that phrase, the disappearing princess, at a dinner I wasn't supposed to attend in London years later. The elite don't talk about their own while they're winning, only when the cracks start to show. After the prince came the count. Kurt von Haugwitz, Hardenberg, Reventlow. If Mdivani was a thief, Reventlow was a jailer. He moved her to London, to a mansion called Winfield House, 35 rooms of absolute silence. He didn't want her at parties. He wanted her in the house, producing an heir and signing papers. The abuse was whispered about in the kitchens and the stables, but in the drawing rooms of the 1930s, you didn't call the police on account. You just poured another drink and looked at the Cartier emeralds on her neck. Those emeralds. They once belonged to Catherine the Great. Barbara bought them to feel like a queen, but they only served to make her neck look even thinner, even more fragile. The Rockefellers had a name for people who lived like her. They called them volatiles. I suppose it's because when you have everything, the only thing left to do is explode. By the late 1930s, Barbara was terrified. She was a woman who owned a yacht 73 feet long, custom built with gold-plated fixtures, yet she spent her nights hiding in her bedroom because she was afraid of her own husband. The divorce from Reventlow cost her millions, and it nearly cost her her son, Lance. But you see, the money always provided an exit, even if the exit led to another trap. What nobody tells you about having that much wealth is that it makes you a target for the most sophisticated kind of betrayal. It wasn't just the husbands, it was the lawyers, the advisors, the friends, who always seemed to have a foundation that needed a donation or a villa that needed a buyer. She was surrounded by a court of sycophants who were paid to tell her she was beautiful while they watched her starve herself to death. I remember the room going quiet when her name came up at a charity gala in '87. Everyone was still laughing then, but the older ones, the ones who remembered the Woolworth era, they just looked at their champagne and said nothing. They knew. They had always known. There was a moment, just before the war, when she tried to do something right. She gave Winfield House to the American government for $1. A 35-room mansion, given away. The press called it a grand gesture. I call it a desperate attempt to lighten the load. She was trying to buy back the public's love, trying to shed the poor little rich girl label that had become a noose. But the thing about labels in the elite world is that they're written in permanent ink. You can give away a house, you can give away $1 billion, but you can't give away the shadow that follows the money. And so, she kept moving. Paris, Tangier, California. New husbands, new titles, new jewels. She bought a palace in Tangier called Sidi Hosni and filled it with artifacts that would make a museum jealous. She was the hostess of the world, throwing parties that lasted for days, where the guest list was a who's who of the 1940s jet set. But if you'd been in that ballroom, if you'd watched her hands on the table, when the music was at its loudest, you would have seen the tremor. You would have seen a woman who was terrified of the silence that comes when the music stops, and the guests go home to lives that don't depend on a trust fund. It's a cycle, you see. Control, crack, patch, break again. She was trying to patch a shattered soul with diamonds and aristocrats, but the cracks were getting wider. Every marriage was a bet against her own loneliness, and she was a gambler with an infinite bankroll and zero luck. The power she inherited from her grandfather, that ability to buy anything, had finally turned on her. It had bought her a life where everything was a performance and no one was in the audience for the right reasons. You know what the truly wealthy have in common? They all think they can negotiate with destiny. Barbara Hutton thought she could negotiate with time and love, using the Woolworth fortune as collateral. She was wrong. And the way she realized she was wrong, the moment the gold started to turn to lead, is the part of the story where the glamour finally ends and the tragedy begins. I watched it from a distance, like everyone else in the inner circle. But the closer you got, the more the air felt dangerously thin. By the early 70s, the mask wasn't just slipping. It was dissolving into something unrecognizable. You see, the thing about a breaking point is that it's rarely a loud explosion. It's the sound of a single crystal glass cracking in a room where everyone is pretending not to hear. For Barbara, that sound came in the summer of '72. It was a phone call about a plane crash in the Colorado mountains. Her son, Lance Reventlow, the only person who belonged to her without a contract, a title, or a bill of sale, was gone. I've seen men like her husbands lose entire empires in a single trading session, but watching a woman like Barbara lose her only anchor, that's a different kind of silence. She didn't scream. She didn't cry for the cameras. The elite don't do that. Instead, she just stopped trying to patch the cracks in the hull. The cycle of control, crack, and patch that had sustained her for decades had finally reached the point where the water was coming in too fast. She moved to a suite at the Beverly Wilshire, but her palaces in Tangier and Paris were still running, still staffed, still waiting for a woman who no longer existed. And you know, it reminds me of something I once saw at a private dinner in Hyannisport. The truly wealthy don't just lose money. They lose the sense of where their skin ends and the goal begins. They spend their lives building a monument to their name, only to realize at the end that they're the only ones trapped inside it. But back to Barbara. The catalyst wasn't the bad investments or the 7 alimony payments. It was the realization that the empire she had been a hostage to for 50 years no longer had an heir. She began to give the jewels away to strangers, to bellhops, to anyone who offered a moment of distraction. It wasn't charity. It was a desperate shedding of weight. One evening, the lights in her suite flickered, and she just watched them, not calling for the concierge. She knew. Everyone in that hallway knew. The mask was off, and there was nothing underneath but $1 billion worth of ghosts. The pace of this story needs to slow down now, because that is how it ended for her. Not with a crash, but with a long, slow fading into a hotel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and expensive perfume. By the late 70s, the woman who had once owned the Romanov emeralds was confined to a bed in the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. She weighed 80 pounds of bone and regret, fueled by a diet of Coca-Cola and gin. The poor little rich girl had become a ghost before she even died, a prisoner in a suite where the curtains were always drawn against a world she no longer recognized. You see, the silence of the elite is different from the silence of the poor. It's heavier. It's curated. I remember a lawyer I knew who handled one of her final matters. He told me she didn't even look at the settlement papers. She just asked him if he would stay for a drink. That was the price of a human voice in her final years. A blank check or a piece of Cartier handed to a bellhop just to ensure they didn't leave the room. The woman who had inherited $1 billion legacy was now paying for the illusion of companionship. In May of 1979, the heart that had been broken by 7 husbands and the weight of 1,000 nickels and dimes finally gave out. There was no grand funeral in a cathedral, no state mourning, just a quiet announcement and the cold, hard reality of the ledger. When the executors finally opened her accounts, they didn't find the Woolworth fortune. They found $3,500. The math is brutal, isn't it? She had spent it all. Or rather, the world had spent her. The palaces, the yachts, the emeralds of queens. They were all gone, dissolved into the pockets of men who never loved her and a lifestyle that was designed to consume her. Nobody cried at the reading of the will. That tells you everything you need to know about the inheritance of silence. The husbands were gone. The friends had evaporated. And the empire her grandfather built had moved on to the next set of names on the stock exchange. The last time I heard her name mentioned without a pause afterward was years ago, but in that hotel room in 1979, the only thing left was the echo of a name that no longer had any gold to back it up. Today, if you look through an auction catalog from Christie's or Sotheby's, you might see a familiar sparkle. Lot 104. A yellow diamond. A string of pearls that once belonged to a queen. It doesn't tell you about the shaking hands that wore those stones, or the hotel room where they were traded for a few hours of curated conversation. You see, that's the final insult of a life lived in gold. Your most intimate possessions become nothing more than lot numbers in the portfolios of the next generation of predators. The Woolworth name still stands on buildings, carved in cold stone, but the woman herself has been washed away. I saw a young socialite last year at a dinner in Gstaad, wearing a necklace that looked remarkably like one of Barbara's. No one mentioned her name. It was just an antique piece. It's the inheritance of silence, really. To be so visible that the world knows your face, yet so hollow that your existence is erased by the very money that was supposed to preserve it. What if she had been born with nothing? Would she have found the love she spent $1 billion looking for? Or was the tragedy already written into her blood before the first nickel was ever earned? In the end, Barbara Hutton's story is a ledger that never truly balanced, starting with a $50 million empire and ending with a $3,500 whisper in a rented room. We remember the diamonds and the yachts, but the real legacy she left behind wasn't material. It was a warning. Wealth of that magnitude doesn't just buy things. It buys a distance from humanity that eventually becomes a chasm. impossible to cross. She spent her life searching for a version of herself that wasn't for sale, only to realize the empire had claimed the woman long before the money finally ran out. The money outlasted the woman, as it always does, leaving behind only the cold glitter of stones that never knew her name. Maybe the real inheritance was never the money. Maybe it was the silence that came with it. If this glimpse into the golden cage moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Was she a victim of her name or her own choices? Tell me which fallen dynasty we should observe next, and subscribe to stay within the inner circle. Let's get into it.